As I continue on this journey of infinite introspection that is my theorizing of parallel government in its application toward some kind of socialist or democratic socialist revolution, I find myself increasingly drawn to the aspects of the work, the whole thing as a role-playing game. And that's a bit silly of me, but I've been putting that part of it off, actually. I've been exploring the historical aspects, the theoretical aspects, the rather more serious aspects, less fun aspects. I was sort of hitting a wall in life in terms of the theorizing of it all, keeping up the motivation to continue this work. I guess the way I feel like is the very process of writing a book is almost like the ultimate solo Dungeons and Dragons campaign. It's like an infinite journey of introspection, and it seems I'm just committed to going as far down I can this tunnel of theorizing parallel government until the theory is so complete that it becomes convincing to a mass audience. I think I can do this. But the truth of it is, listening to some of my old content, I realize, I'm so far down this tunnel that I really can't give up. But I'm also learning how to moderate my effort so that I can do my ordinary survival stuff and balance it with this work. Because I had all this idea of continuing to be an activist and a material political actor, and I'm kind of realizing that I was wrong to prioritize that over this theoretical work. That I should throw myself completely into this theoretical work and prioritize it over concrete activity, so-called concrete activity, and to uphold this theoretical work is actually the most material and most concrete form of activity, and most necessary and most central. I'm glad I'm finally allowing myself to assign this work its proper importance, both to the fate of the species and also just to myself. It's a self-actualization project for me, I admit, and there's a lot of aspects to that. On the one hand, I kind of feel like if this is the best strategy to achieve economic transformation, which I do believe it is, then there's another aspect, which is the relationship between self-actualization, psychologically, and systemic change. Because sometimes I ask myself, when I'm not having very much fun, I try to figure out how to have fun, and I say, well, what would I be doing for fun if I lived in a society where socialism had already been achieved? And what would I do for recreation? How would I enjoy myself? And I come to realize that I cannot possibly know the answer to that question because I do not inhabit the material conditions in which that question could be answered. And so I'm fighting for socialism in order to know myself, to know who I would be in a different society, because I believe that version of me is the true me. And under this system, that version of me, the true me, is repressed. I want to discover the true me by creating a world where that true me can emerge and I can know it and learn it. But there's more to it. There's also the question of maybe I can figure out what I would do for fun. And the truth is, I think I would play role-playing games. And I finally got to the part of the work where I've been watching all these YouTube videos about the early life of Lenin and all this. Now I'm finally watching videos about how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so now I think I can finally get to the fun part of the journey, where I actually start to enjoy it. This is a pivotal change for me, because now everything I was doing felt obligatory. Perhaps that was the opportunism of which I've been gradually purging myself. I felt like I had to do this concrete work, this activism, to keep up my reputation in the scene. And now I'm just freeing myself of that completely, and allowing myself to plunge, immerse, as they say, an immersive RPG. There's this Alan Watts quote where if you allowed yourself infinite imagination, infinite fantasy, and just let your fantasies run wild, and you had godlike power to incarnate yourself into any fantasy you wanted, eventually you would fantasize yourself as you currently are, where you are right now. It's this sort of Nietzschean affirmation of life and embracing your fate, amor fati. But furthermore, I kind of have to realize that, I'm a little bit of a gamer. Not too much of one, but as much of one as anyone else, I suppose. What I realized is, maybe this process of me writing this book, maybe this is all a hallucination. Maybe I'm in the Matrix. But maybe it's not a bad Matrix. Maybe after the revolution, I get into role-playing games, and I get so deep into them. I start playing games that are so convincing that you lose yourself in them. Games that make you lose your memory that it's not real. Full immersion games, where you can't tell the difference between the game and reality. And maybe what I do after the revolution is I play the game of me writing the book, this book, that wins the revolution. And so maybe this is all my science fantasy, cyberpunk role-playing game. That's an extremely affirmative way of thinking. It could also be that I'd look back at this as the worst time in my life and I would never want to repeat it. But I'm beginning to think I'm finally embracing this process as enjoyable. And I think part of that is embracing the idea of it as a process. It's not that I'm not seeking the final result. I certainly am. But I'm finally coming to embrace the process. And that now that I'm ceasing to punish myself for not having yet achieved the final result, now I can finally just take my time and enjoy writing the book that fixes the world. Instead of it being a process of misery, it can be a process of delight. It can itself be my form of recreation. And I can balance it with all the things I need to do to survive and maybe a little bit to play. No reason I can't still muck around with elves and orcs and wizards. Why not? I sort of begin to wonder that if humanity achieves socialism and we achieve the singularity, which is this hyper progression of technological power, once AI becomes very strong and the AI begins redesigning itself in iterative loops until it develops godlike power. If the AI was benevolent toward humanity, perhaps the AI would actually recreate the universe in a sort of medieval fantasy form where magic was real and we could just manifest our mind's will through magic using certain techniques. Maybe a fantasy world is the ultimate product of socialism. Maybe that's what this is all headed toward. And this is all very abstract and far out thinking, but I guess I just feel like this is the magic that becomes possible for a person who embraces the journey. I know that in some ways we've been in the most miserable, absolutely dismal phase of our lives, especially for millennials. But there's another side of it, which is maybe these challenges, maybe these are the greatest times in our lives. And someday, after risen up against the bosses and the wealthy and the owners, and we've fixed the world, maybe things will be very boring then, once all the problems are gone. And maybe we'll look back at these times almost as like our edgy adolescence, our punk phase. Maybe the revolution is the world's punk phase, and we'll just never be able to experience the kinds of feelings that we have in times like this, that we had in times during like COVID or during the first Trump administration. Maybe we'll never have that kind of passion again. But maybe as a form of recreation after the revolution, everyone plays games about fighting the revolution, kind of like people who play games about maybe the American Revolution now. In the future, we'll play games about the global socialist revolution. And the kids will be playing it and they'll have no idea what it was like. And then the adults be watching their kids playing it, having PTSD flashbacks. Oh God, I was actually there when that happened. I do have a point with all this. I guess the real point is remember that as hard as these times are, they might be the crescendo of struggle. That maybe the challenge is actually pleasurable. Maybe this is the most DIY survival stuff we're ever going to go through. And in the future, to be able to go through that will be seen as a luxury. People in our time watch Game of Thrones, which is obviously fantasy, but also a bit of a medieval throwback. We have this fantasy of medieval times. If we actually lived in them, we'd say, oh God, no, get us to the future. But in the future, which is now for us, we all just want to go back to medieval times. And over the course of eternity, aren't we always in the middle of eternity? Which is what medieval really means, the Middle Age. So I guess I just want to remind people, if you're really struggling under the oppression of capitalism, just remember that historically, you might have the privilege of being the last generation to have to resist capitalism. And the glory may be all ours. And maybe a new dawn is rising. Not everyone takes stock in astrology, I take some. And there are these Uranus-Jupiter conjunctions, when instead of the planets being opposition or square, they're actually in the same place. They're conjuncted. And Uranus is like a revolution planet, and Jupiter is like an energy and inspiration planet. And when you get these two together, things really pop. And this is what was going on during the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street. This is what was going on during the 1999 World Trade Organization protests. It was Uranus-Jupiter conjunctions. And we're about to have another one around April 21st, 2024 is when it's centered around, but we're moving into it already. It's going to be a year of inspirational rebellions that seem impossible before they occur, but do occur. And we'll be having flashbacks in our memories to times like this when it happened, like 1999 or 2011. Just remember to enjoy these times, because they might be the best times you ever have. I hope that's all profound enough for you. Remember to enjoy the video game that you live in, of surviving the downfall of capitalism. and rising above it and getting through it and seeing the other side. Enjoy the video game that you live in. You may struggle, it may hurt, but I think the game is about to change. All this dreary, dismal Trump COVIDism, I think we're finally beginning to climb out of it. And when we do, I think what people will struggle with is actually maintaining moderation. We've been in a period of depression, and it will be tempting to enter a period of mania. There is such a thing as positive stress. Too much positive energy is still overwhelming. So I'll just remind people who are going through that, if you're exploding with energy, just remember how lethargic you were during COVID, and everything balances each other out. And if you're going a bit over the top in 2024, you just remember moderation, and that next year things will probably not be so energetic. But, the year after, 2025. So, or, a few years later. Embrace the game. Embrace the game you live in. The Revolution game. Revolution RPG. That's the game we all live in. It's an immersive game that swallows everything. But get some friends, or just be your own friend. LARP it a little bit, roleplay, dress up as an elf or an orc or a wizard every now and then. Have some fun. Have fun living in the most intense times in human history. Have fun living in the downfall of capitalism. Have fun being a participant.